36-year-old bachelor gets drunk on New Year's Eve and mistakenly breaks into apartment of the woman, ruining her romantic celebration with a fiancé. A recap of tear-wrenching drama or psychological thriller? No, that's the plot of our most beloved New Year comedy, Ironia Судьбы, the irony of fate, that possesses TV channels around the turn of the year and is as firm a symbol of the festivities as are the Christmas tree, champagne, fireworks, Olivier, aka Russian salad, and the chimes from the Spasskaya Tower. Peculiar, but most people from the former Soviet countries admit that they don't even particularly like neither the Olivier salad nor the film, but feel an inexplicable nostalgic craving for both around the new year. And nothing brings out the holiday spirit better than preparing the former with the latter playing in the background. So, let's explore this phenomenon that became such an inherent part of our cultural code. And I mean the film, not the salad, though we might color the salad along the way. I'm Katya, and this is Soviet Movies Explained. The full title of this 3-hour two-part TV film matches its runtime, Ironia Судьбы или С легким паром, which translates into The Irony of Fate or Enjoy Your Bath. The subtitle is usually dropped, but I have to explain it anyway, since its more accurate translation would be Congratulations on having had a light steam. It's an old Russian saying, traditionally uttered to someone coming from the steam bath, banya, that initially used to be more like smoke bath, with a risk of getting carbon monoxide poisoning, which would be then considered heavy steam. So basically it's congratulating somebody on staying alive and getting cleaner. Back to the subject. The film was written and directed by our famous and beloved comediographer Eldar Rязанов. It premiered on the only federal channel there was on the 1st of January 1976 at 6 p.m. Moscow time and instantly became a hit, having been watched by approximately 100 million people that night. The film opens with an overture that is a 3-minute cartoon by Vitaly Peskov and seems a bit out of place, but serves the purpose of explaining the main plot device, the drab uniformity of public housing in the USSR. In the 60s, highly decorative neoclassical houses of the Stalin era that were built to impress were heavily criticized for their impracticality and excess. In the country devastated by war, most of the population lived in terrible conditions that needed to be remedied fast and cheap. Enter Plattenbau, a construction method where houses are assembled out of large prefabricated concrete elements, an entire wall or a fully equipped bathroom unit, much like Lego blocks. Planned economy allowed for such elements to be produced en masse and spread all around the country. The buildings, and that includes not only apartment blocks but also schools, shops, hospitals, even underground stations, were standardized and serialized and unique buildings banned, reducing architects to picking floor tiles out of 3 options and facade colors out of 2. Since a majority of apartments were allotted to the population and not sold, they didn't need to look attractive or different. People were happy enough to move out of shared apartments or dormitories. In general, uniformity and mass production were favored over variety and design. Not only did everyone have pretty much the same furniture, but even the street names were the same. With entire villages shaped off to accommodate new mikrorayony, micro-districts, urban planners had to come up with hundreds of street names and fast. And when they ran out of ideas, we got the imaginative New Street, or Forest Street, or Builder Street, and when they ran out of those, Second Builder Street, Third Builder Street, and so on. Or the act of ultimate desperation, проектируемый проезд, a driveway to be designed. We first meet our protagonist, Zhenya, in his new home, where he decorates a Christmas tree with his girlfriend Galia and discusses their plans for the New Year's Eve. Wait a sec. Aren't most Christmas trees already at the curb by the 31st of December their purpose served like a week ago? Well, before 1917, Russian Empire celebrated Christmas much like the rest of Christian world, with trees, gifts, family, and lots of food. New Year was greeted with fireworks, merriment, and more food. Then the revolution happened and all religious activities were firmly banned, so there went Christmas. As for the New Year, communists were a bit indecisive, with the civil war ongoing and country in turmoil, and both the 31st of December and the 1st of January remained working days for quite some time. Only in the mid-30s did New Year celebrations begin to be encouraged by the government, along with their introduction of most memorable Christmas traditions, which were now strictly secularized as New Year attributes. To this day, New Year remains the most beloved holiday by most of my compatriots. A merging of both Christmas and New Year traditions, thus we're forever torn to either spend the evening with our families or go out and have a wild party. Most dedicated of us manage to do both in one night. Much as our hero Zhenya here, his girlfriend coaxes him to pass over an invitation to a friend party and to celebrate together, just the two of them. Reluctantly, he agrees, and Galia pushes forward, hinting that maybe he would finally propose to her after 2 years of dating. Zhenya becomes nervous and admits that he once attempted to tie a knot with another woman, but at the last moment panicked and fled to Leningrad, former St. Petersburg. This time, however, he is 142% sure. Foreshadowing! The couple celebrates their betrothal with a song. Despite not being a musical, The Irony of Fate owes much of its love and popularity to its music and songs. Rязанов had a strong love and knowledge of poetry, so he cleverly turned his favorite pieces, some of which were banned or never published in the USSR, into ballads. Clever, beautiful lyrics, performed in an assuming manner of bard songs, a genre similar to new folk very popular back then, didn't require strong vocal or guitar playing skills, and were eagerly adopted for sing-along parties all around the Soviet Union. Galia gets clad in her white furs, that were as chic then as they are now, and lives until the evening with apartment keys as a sign of their engagement, since engagement rings were not yet in fashion. This role was a cinematic breakthrough for the actor Andrei Mягkov, who earlier had just episodic roles that nevertheless include one of Karamazov brothers and a young Lenin. His character should have been charming, but plain, a bit awkward and self-conscious, but not a complete dork. It was indeed unusual to remain single for so long, with most young people in the Soviet Union marrying in their early 20s, but not at all odd for a grown man to share a two-room apartment with his parents, and once he eventually marries, for his wife to move in with them as well. That's why, although Zhenya's mother is not particularly fond of strong-headed Galia, she worries that otherwise her 36-year-old son would never settle. In order not to disturb the happy couple, she chases away son's classmate, Pavlik, who came in to remind him of their traditional last day of the year's ablutions in the public bath. She rebuffs him with
«Иди в баню».
Go to a banya, which is accurate, but in Russian is also a mild variation of go to hell. But after some deliberation, Zhenya decides to go to banya after all. This, an almost pagan ritual of having a steam bath on the last day of the year to greet a new one squeaky clean, was not as common before the film's release but became quite popular afterwards. Some public baths were inherited from the Tsarist times and were luxuriously decorated palaces reminding one of Roman therma, an impression enhanced by Togolite white sheets. The one in the movie, however, is not an actual public bath, nor is it even a set, but a decorated vestibule of Mosfilm Studios, bitter cold in winter. To this day, the actors offer conflicting accounts on whether what they were drinking was actually vodka or not. Zhenya and his 3 classmates engage in the most cliché drinking scene you could possibly find in a collection of Russian stereotypes, with reluctant refusals to drink, followed by that means that you don't respect me, or you cannot refuse a toast to your engagement, or your bride, or your health, and assurances that one is completely sober and in control. Notice, however, that the tipsiness that the actors skillfully depict always remains amiable and funny, neither threatening or disgusting. They blubber and wobble but stay docile, neither puke or become aggressive. I am sure that was not by design, but Ironia Судьбы, along with many other movies before and after it, contributed to glorifying and downplaying heavy drinking. The company then crawls to the airport to see Pavlik off, who has to fly to Leningrad to celebrate New Year with his wife. But both Pavlik and Zhenya are sound asleep, and to their friends cannot recall who of them needs to go. In an amazing bout of inebriated logic, they deduce that it is Zhenya and put him on a plane to Leningrad. Leningrad was a Soviet name for modern St. Petersburg, the second largest Russian city and former capital of the Russian Empire. However, for this film, Leningrad was selected for plot reasons. Moscow and Leningrad are separated by a mere 40-minute flight, not enough for our protagonist to come to his senses. Here, the annoyed passenger is the director himself. Rязанов didn't plan to have a cameo in the movie, but they were short of actors for this scene and he stepped in. This started a tradition of him making an appearance in all of his future films. Zhenya wakes up enough to drag himself into a taxi, and the driver is not at all puzzled by the address. Threadbuilder Street, House 25, Apartment 12. It appears that there is such an address in Leningrad, in one of the newly developed mikrorayons. And what are the odds? The house looks absolutely the same. Here, I should shortly draw your attention to this bunch of greenery that our hero is carrying around in his briefcase. These are not flowers, no lettuce for salad, but venik, a bath broom commonly used in Russian steam baths for massage. Much like in essential oil therapy, different types of branches are believed to have different healing effects on people, with birch being the most widespread and well-known. Zhenya's opens an apartment that looks identical to his own, including the appalling wallpaper. In his state of intoxication, he doesn't notice the more subtle details and instantly falls asleep. We, however, do, and should address the apartment's decor. Although it's a film set designed to be the best background for the action, and it looks okay, even stylish nowadays, most of the early viewers were appalled by its greenish black living room and the striped hall and took real pity on the heroes. The thing is that in Soviet times, all the new allotted flats came fully decorated and equipped with kitchens and built-in closets. Those who moved in had no say in the design, it was a lottery. And since the rooms were quite small, no more than 15 square meters and low ceiling, it was considered big luck to get lighter walls with some neutral floral pattern. Inhabitants could redecorate later, but it required procuring all the materials, and that was not easy. Meanwhile, the real owner, a lovely young woman Nadia, approaches, accompanied by a melancholic piano tune performed by the film's composer himself. Mikhail Tereverdiev, who wrote the score for this film, has greatly contributed to the success of the movie. They say that before the music was added, the rough cut was quite bland and boring. Most of the movie's score became iconic and is instantly recognizable all over the former Soviet Union. You would be surprised to know that the female lead in this film is played by a Polish actress, Barbara Brylska. Of all the Soviet actresses, Rязanov couldn't find the one who would have a blend of comedic, dramatic and musical talents, as well as charm, devoid of vulgarity, independence combined with vulnerability. Then he recalled a young promising actress from the film The Anatomy of Love, who happened to be a perfect fit. Soviet women were captivated by Barbara's Western looks, and everything about her was copied: hairstyle, makeup and clothes. Suspense grows as Nadia takes her time to discover the sleeping trespasser. But once she does, what do you think are her actions? A. She runs away and calls the police. B. She runs away, blocks the door and calls the police. C. She runs away, blocks the door and calls for neighbors, who call the police. No. She tries to wake him up. Some slapstick shenanigans ensue, resulting in Zhenya slowly beginning to realize that something is off. Along the way, we find out that Nadia too lives together with her mother. No father in the picture in both cases, but it's a post-war generation. That the effective area of the flat is mere 32 square meters, and the furniture set costs 830 rubles, with an average salary being between 100–150 rubles per month at the time. Another fun fact is that this scene was selected for the male lead screen test, and when all the reels were presented to the casting committee, they explicitly opposed casting Andrei Mягkov because you can see that he's clearly drunk here. Rязанов, who for the fact knew that the actor was sober, decided that Andrei must play Zhenya. After comparing the addresses on their IDs, Zhenya finally believes that he has wound up in another city, and in Leningrad of all places, and his poor Galia would truly think that he has Julia Roberts on her. They are interrupted by the arrival of Nadia's fiancé, Ippolit. Glad to have a man by her side who might help her sort this ordeal, she attempts to present the situation as a joke, but Ippolit throws a jealous tantrum, convinced that Nadia tries to cover up a fling with a lover, and leaves outraged. Devastated, Nadia apathetically lets Zhenya call Galia, but it's the 70s, long-distance calls had to be requested in advance, and it could take up to an hour for the call to come through. By the way, it's quite unrealistic that both apartments which our heroes have just moved into would even have a landline, since usually it took weeks, if not months, for the new homes to get connected. Nadia and Zhenya end up joyously welcoming the new year together. Its coming marked by the 12 chimes of the Spasskaya Tower broadcast on TV. This tradition holds up to this day. the countdown usually preceded by the president's address. Meanwhile, we should rate whose New Year celebration was the worst. A. Nadia's and Zhenya's. B. Ippolit driving angrily and pointlessly around and getting into a mild accident. C. Gada's alone in Moscow and clueless of her fiance's whereabouts. D. Pavlik's wife alone in Leningrad, clueless of her husband's whereabouts. Our leads talk a little bit about themselves. Zhenya is a surgeon and Nadia teaches Russian language and literature at school. They ironically remark that their professions are both most important and least paid, the notion that unfortunately holds up to this day. Then the call to Moscow comes through, and Galia, outraged that Zhenya ran off to Leningrad again, breaks off the engagement and hangs up. He ungentlemanly takes out his anguish on Nadia, who orders him out, but before he could leave there is a surprise visit from two colleagues, who are very curious to finally meet Nadia's mysterious fiancé. Embarrassed to tell them the truth, she presents Zhenya as Ippolit and forces him to play along. Here is time to mention that though Barbara Bryliska spoke Russian, she had a strong accent and had to be dubbed. And it is Valentina Talizina, the taller actress of the two, who did the dub. So in this scene she basically talks to herself and has to speak in a deeper voice for her own role to make them different. The friends make the protagonists kiss by shouting which means bitter, a traditional Russian call uttered at weddings to make the newlyweds kiss. It hints that the food and drinks at the banquet started to taste bitter and they need the kiss to sweeten it up. Then Nadia sings an upbeat song about the sadness and anonymity of train travel.
На Тихорецкую состав отправится, вагончик тронется, перрон останется.
The songs were dubbed too, but the voices were so well matched that for years people believed that the actors had sung themselves. Moreover, Barbara was dubbed by Alla Pugacheva, an unknown performer at the time who became hugely popular afterwards, and to this day remains the matriarch of the Russian show business. Yet, most listeners were used to her singing like this. And no one recognized her in this gentler, subdued performance.
Про мое прошлое и настоящее, наврусь три короба.
Nadia's colleagues leave, and our heroes visibly warm up towards each other. They muse over their ridiculous encounter and love hysterically while dancing. The spell is, however, broken by a doorbell, and there ends part 1 of the movie. At the door is Ippolit, seeking forgiveness, but upon seeing Zhenya, he immediately bounces back to being a jealous jerk. This time Zhenya steps in trying to reason with him, which results in a brawl, and exasperated Nadia kicks both men out. At this moment, a slightly more collected Galia calls back, trying to clarify the situation. This time Nadia tries to explain what has happened, but Galia doesn't buy the bathhouse plain Sam address story, hanging up again, convinced that Nadia deliberately stole her fiancé. Both Zhenya and Ippolit, who found an excuse to return, overhear Nadia defending Zhenya, and Ippolit storms away yet again. This time our heroes are less upset about the second loss of their sweethearts and seem reluctant to part. Playing for time, each of them sings their most famous song. Zhenya's deceitfully cheerful one is about the advantages of having nothing. No home, no wife, no dog, no friend, no relatives, and no life, because then you won't lose them.
Мне нравится, что вы больны не мной.
Nadia's romantic ballad is a 1915 poem by Marina Tsvetaeva that presumably was dedicated to her sister's husband. In it she thanks him for not being infatuated by her, thus giving her peace. We find out more about Nadia's past. She is 34, never been married, but was a mistress for 10 years. Her engagement to Ippolit was one of convenience, a good opportunity to finally settle with a reliable man. Zhenya in turn admits that he was always shy and never popular with girls. His first love marrying his best friend Pavlik, that poor Ira, the fourth victim everyone forgot about. But his encounter with Nadia make him bolder and more reckless, and he's quite happy about it. Next part is honestly weird. It's some bizarre mating dance where Zhenya indeed is quite impertinent. refusing to leave, having his own fit of jealousy, throwing Hippolyte's picture out of the window, and chasing the real Hippolyte away yet again. Nadia pretends that she is incensed, but does nothing to throw him out. Finally, she leaves herself, threatening to fetch the police, but even their party is some strange foot fetish stuff. In this scene where Nadia picks up Hippolyte's photo, you can see a different face on it. It's an actor who was initially cast but had to walk out in the middle of production. And when Nadia aimlessly wanders amidst St. Petersburg's tourist attractions, all the snow is fake. That winter there was no snow, which would be completely normal nowadays but was an oddity then. And they had to use cotton wool and bits of paper. The sad song in the background is the only known poem of the writer Vladimir Kirshon, who was killed during Stalin's repressions of the 1930s. In it, the narrator looks for his sweetheart, asking the trees, the elements, and the moon for her whereabouts. When finally he approaches his dearest friend with the question, he answers, "Your sweetheart is my wife now." Meanwhile, I should compliment Nadia's mother, who makes an appearance and upon finding a stranger in her flat acts as an unreasonable adult, locks him in the room and stands guard. Still not calling the police though. This, however, goes nowhere. Nadia returns, her mother leaves, the couple bickers, then makes out, again interrupted by insistent knocking. In comes, who would have thought, Hippolyte? But this time he is drunk, Zhenya style. When explaining himself, by the way, he makes Italian slip of the tongue that unfortunately was lost in translation. He says,
"Подогрели, обобрали",
which means they got me drunk and robbed me, instead of
подобрали, обогрели.
they picked me up and warmed me up. That leaves us wondering which of these options, if not all of them, were true. Hippolyte's drunken rambling hits too close to home. He reminds Zhenya of the abandoned girlfriend, whom he had forgotten so easily in favor of a new one. He also mentions that it takes a long time to build something, but no time at all to destroy. In this moment of simultaneous hilarity and drama, I, however, have to point out another peculiar detail of a typical mass-constructed domicile. A single water tap that can swivel to be used over either the sink or the bathtub. On a national scale, such an arrangement allowed for huge savings on bathroom fixtures. The inhabitants were welcome to install a second faucet themselves, but it was a big project and the majority never did that. Hippolyte's incoherent revelations serve as a wake-up call for our heroes. They feel that the night's magic has dissolved, and they have to get back to their noble lives. Heartbroken, Zhenya returns to Moscow and, comforted by his mother, decides never to marry, since no one could take better care of him than her. Exhausted, he falls asleep to be awakened by Nadia, who came after him under the pretext of delivering the venik that he'd forgotten. There is a happy reunion, although the stare that Zhenya's mother gives to this new contender for her son's affections would send chills down the spine of any prospective daughter-in-law. In come the three culprits of the previous evening's libations, feeling apologetic for the mix-up they've caused, but Zhenya thanks him for changing his life and helping him find his true love. The end. So that was The Irony of Fate for you guys. As I rewatched the music for this review, I was pleasantly surprised how well it holds up, even after 45 years. It is a really well-written and mercifully executed story, with great acting and terrific music that radiates holiday mood. Yes, the second part drags a little, with too much repetitiveness and brooding, and Zhenya clearly oversteps his boundaries in a rather uncomfortable way, but I still would watch this movie if I happened to stumble upon it while surfing TV channels over any new one, as are most of my compatriots. And of course, it is tempting to dissect the psychological profiles of our heroes, him being an overgrown sissy boy with commitment issues who sprouts a second manic personality all of a sudden, and her having had a degrading relationship for years, ready to enter the jealous clutches of another one and falling for a complete stranger of questionable repute. Saying nothing about the logistics of their potential relationship, them living and working in different cities and all. And what about that poor public wife's era? But come on, it's a modern Christmas tale. It's the same old story of a poor boy being transformed by a long journey's hardships and conquering the princess at the end. Although it's vodka and planes and quirks of urban planning, not magical boots and dragons that affect his fate. Quite ironic. And if you think that such story could have only happened in the pre-cellular times of the communist rule, Bollywood surely doesn't agree. In 2015, they released an uncredited remake called I Love and Why that copied the original almost scene by scene, and the mix-up is between Chicago and New York. You might check it out, it's quite fun. And definitely watch the original, but please stay away from a god-awful cash-grabbing, magic-killing sequel that was concocted in 2007. Iron Fate is freely available on Mosfilm's YouTube channel with subtitles in English, French, Spanish and Bulgarian. I'll leave the links below and would be really curious to read your opinions in the comments. Have you previously heard about the movie? What do you think about the premise? Would Zhenya and Nadia stay together? Any comments as well as feedback would be greatly appreciated. Also consider to subscribe, turn on notifications and share, the entire package, as well as check out my Patreon link because yes, I'm that shameless and have big plans for the channel in the coming new year. Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year! С Новым годом и Рождеством! And I hope to see you soon.
Лишь мы затянем песню, как все скворцы в округе голосами своими поддерживают нас.